the challenges that face humanity now as a result of our unsustainable practices are manifold. You have rising sea levels, melting ice caps, and it's not only environmental, it's also social. A system which allows the rich to gain in wealth off the backs of the poor is unsustainable just as much as a new coal plant in an already polluted area. And this is why sustainable development as a definition has really grown in terms of its scope. Well, sustainable development has a rather short history. In the lead up to a conference in Stockholm, Sweden in 1972, the developing countries were saying, how can you prevent us from developing as these other nations have by restricting our access to environmental resources or polluting and things of this nature. Whereas the developed countries were doing the opposite. They were saying, you must restrict the resources you're using in the process of your development. And out of this kind of disagreement was born the concept of sustainable development.
At the heart of all the debates at the UN right now, most of the so-called developing countries are asking for the chance to be able to develop themselves, to have a certain lifestyle that they see that others are having. And some of the very difficult questions to answer will be, how can developing countries have the opportunity to do so by putting the climate more at risk? And what will be the responsibility of the developed countries who are responsible for the current situation in the first place? And it's a very, very tense issue because it talks about who's accountable, who's to pay for the future transition, who's going to help the developing countries become so-called developed.
It's a definition that has evolved and become richer over the years. In general, sustainable development is about the relationships that the countries and the peoples of the world have to one another.
It's still a very I versus you, us versus them kind of a discourse. And because of the trying to protect your own turf or your sovereignty, we're not actually trying to move ahead together as one global family. The Baha'i International Community's United Nations Office is an international organization accredited to the UN, and we have consultative status with the Economic and Social Council to provide perspectives and opinions and representing the Baha'i community on various issues. We offer a certain framework for thinking about the advancement of civilization.
The principles of trusteeship, of generosity, of trustworthiness, love, empathy, compassion, these are the principles that we're applying to all the areas of our work here, be it sustainable development, equality of men and women, human rights, in a way that is relevant here at the United Nations.
Those spiritual principles help to focus our attention on those things that are certainly less tangible than the material dimensions, but are so much more fundamental to our lives. The ability to work and to be of service, and all these things that we really struggled to describe, but that we're now finding are actually at the very essence of how we experience life and how we prosper.
The Baha'i international community has been involved with the United Nations since before it was called the United Nations, when it was the League of Nations in Geneva. And naturally that continued through the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. And it expanded in the 90s when there were all kinds of international conferences that dealt with population, advancement of women, sustainable development. One of the really important things that we try to do here is open up space for consultation with anybody involved with the United Nations community.
The UN has a particular way of facilitating and conducting meetings, and we feel that we could try and augment that by offering more consultative spaces where more opinions are being heard, especially from civil society, by convening meetings to bring different actors together so that perspectives can be exchanged instead of a more formal setting at the UN where there's a tendency to fall back on reading of pre-prepared statements.
At the United Nations, many people are still engaged in particularistic thinking. They think of their certain group, faction, country. We find that that strategy of pushing for one theme or one angle, even if the issue is vital, can sometimes be detrimental to the whole. The concept of consultation, where a group of individuals comes together, they detach themselves from their ideas first, they present their ideas in a humble way, willing to discard them or accept them as necessary, really searching for truth honestly and profoundly, with a diversity of voices from all over the world with tremendous different experiences. That is consultation as Baha'is see it, and that we think will lead to a practice or a process that will further the cause of human development.
A key part of development and sustainability is seeing what other cultures and what other peoples and what other wisdom in the world exists that can contribute to us behaving in a manner that really does lead to flourishing.
There's a common understanding, or rather misunderstanding, that the UN doesn't really get much done. But it is really the only forum that currently exists that actually brings all the governments together in a common platform to discuss and hopefully build a common understanding of particular issues.
But if this UN process doesn't happen, if the norms are not changed, if world leaders from all over the globe don't come together to demonstrate that this is an important issue, then how is a conversation at the local level or at the national level going to take place? Change happens at the local level, but it's facilitated, it's encouraged by these policies, by these shifts in thinking. But the importance of this particular discourse is that it starts at the global level and it goes to the local level. Why? Because the implications of unsustainable development are global.